All right, Uhuru, welcome to the breakdown. This program is being brought to you by the African National Women's Organization, ANWO, a mass organization under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. The breakdown is a monthly news, analysis, and opinion program, as well as a platform for highlighting guests whose issues spotlight the international plight of colonized women fighting colonialism. My name is Coco Lewis. I am the lead coordinator of Anwo's Harriet's Daughters Book Club and Study Group and the MC for today's breakdown. I'm joined by the leadership of AMWO, President Yejide Oramila, who is also a leading member of the African People's Socialist Party, Jay Amiche, AMWO member and producer of The Breakdown. And in the background, we have Miriam Muhammad, our chat moderator and researcher. The title of today's programming is The Rent is Due, African Women, Colonialism, and the Real Cost of Sex Work. We're discussing what happens when survival is mistaken for liberation. In this episode, we examine the colonial roots of sex work and expose how poverty, displacement, and gender violence push African women into so-called hustle of the sex trade. We are taking on the myths of choice and agency pushed by feminism and get to the heart of the matter. Colonialism, colonial capitalism created the conditions for sexual exploitation, and only through African self determination can we end it. Today we have a special guest, Elder Conrad Betty Davis from the New Abolitionist Movement. She will contribute her knowledge on how programs such as SNAP and NYC were taxpayer benefits led by the communist organizing, and how many of our social welfare programs were developed out of socialist understanding. Before we break down in today's program, let me remind you that AMWA is the only anti-imperialist, anti-colonial, revolutionary, African internationalist membership organization for African women who organize around pressing issues, local, national, and international issues that contribute to the special oppression of African women in films worldwide. Our vision is to create a world where African women have agency, are valued and protected, and are the makers and shapers of a new society. If you enjoy our content, consider becoming a member if you're an African woman, or financially support ANWO, our on the ground programs, and the construction of the Annual Liberation Center. Our goal for this program is to raise $250. And you could donate anytime during this program by going to annualuhuru.org/donate or on Zelle at info@annualuhuru.org. You can also click scan the code at the top of the screen. You can wear your revolution by purchasing our merchandise at annualuhuru.org/storefront or decolonize.com. As we begin, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow us on all of our platforms. Comment where you're watching from. We are streaming live on the Burning Spirit TV and the African National Women's Organization YouTube channels and the AMWO Facebook page. We encourage you to share this program with your network. Comment shared if you do, and chat with us during the program by typing in the comments. I'm fired up by today's discussion. Uhuru comrades, welcome to the program.
Turn our cameras on and join the queue, comrade. Thank you so much, Coco, for that introduction. And I just also want to welcome Sister Comrade Betty Davis to the group today, so we can have like a really great discussion. As we all know, the breakdown is conversational. We sometimes have guests that represent the interests of the African working class or interests of the colonized working class. And we're so happy to have Dr. Well, are you a doctor, Betty? Sister
All
Comrade?
but I tried
Okay.
to have
I was going to call
Dr.
you doctor.
Clark. Yeah, I
Okay.
tried to have Dr. Henry Clark as my advisor, and it wasn't
Okay.
approved. And
Okay.
so I, stuck to my guns. So I
So
completed
funny.
everything but that. The New School for
Well, thank
Social
you and
Research.
welcome.
At my
You have
college
the
where I
aura.
teach, at the college where I teach, and in the neighborhood, everybody, because it was a political struggle, gave me the title anyway.
Mhm.
So they call me Dr. Davis.
Yes, you have the air about you, like you are a doctor, and I love
Yes,
it. I just always want to call you Dr. Betty
Dr.
Davis.
Davis.
Well, thank you for the honor. You're following
Well,
the procedure of the community. Then, thank you.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
um, let's get Jay's not on yet. So we're gonna go into the topic of today's show, which is sex work. And so we have comrade Betty Davis here, who has a really great historical perspective around some of the social or say social safety net programs that have been under attack lately under the Trump administration, and quite frankly many administrations, but even more severe in this early administration of the Trump administration. But we wanted to talk about the question of sex work because it has come up in other discussions that we've had, and we recognize that when the social and economic economy of a particular place declines, then the level of sexual exploitation of women, and particularly colonized, exploited African women, deepens. And so when we but we also want to just take the wind out of this idea that sex work is an empowerment scheme. Like this is something that we should uphold. And I think when we have this conversation, like we can clearly see that sex work is often portrayed as like empowerment, that it's a personal choice. But for African women, the story begins with colonialism and survival. It challenges what we're about to talk about, challenges like the liberal and feminist narratives that glorify sex work as something that we should be like championing forward, and without acknowledging that the violent system of colonial capitalism that makes it necessary for so many of us to survive. And we have to also understand that colonialism didn't steal just our labor, it commodified our bodies in so many different ways. We've talked about this previously from previous shows. And it and today's sex trade looks like, having an OnlyFans account to street prostitution. And we should recognize that this is not some avenue. It may be more safe, but we should recognize that the fact that there's still a huge industry around the sexual commodification of women is really tied to, the kind of societies that we live in that doesn't provide, or the things that women need, in particular colonized African women need to survive beyond just trading our bodies for money. So this discussion is going to break down economic coercion. It's going to talk about housing insecurity, criminalization, and poverty that trap African women into sexual labor. It's going to talk about even the role of feminism in masking the exploitation with language like choice and agency, and why revolution is the solution for you know um, breaking us out of this being a choice when times get hard. Like if times get hard, like we should be able to fight for a society that is going to ensure that most vulnerable of us, and particularly those who have been subject to sexual exploitation, have the things that we need so that that won't be an option. So and also like we're not here to judge women who engage in this behavior. We're here to expose the system that gives us no real options, and to fight for a world where none of us has to sell our bodies to pay rent or to eat food or just to live. So we're not here to like make anybody feel bad or even to talk about the women who are engaging in this. It's really talking about the system in and of itself, and talking also like about the things that have been introduced into the system to ensure that women have choices, and how that's being attacked right now. So I just want to open it up and just welcome some of our other commenters to come in and talk about um, their opinion about sex work, and then we can get into Dr. Betty, Street Dr. Betty Davis, um, and her understanding of some of the social programs and even understanding of sex work in general. So I'll open it up for you. for anyone. Coco, you on mute, comrade.
I heard, I was like, oh, I love you. And I would just want to say, you are Dr. Betty to us.
Thank you.
Petty bourgeoisie and Western academia does not define who we have as our leaders and who we put in these, positions of respect. You have done the work and you have the knowledge to be a doctor for the African Revolution. So I do honor
May
you.
I just add one point here?
Um,
Queen Mother Moore, I know you've heard of her. She charged me with what to do my PhD paper on. In those days, the elders made decisions. And she
Mhm.
told me to do my PhD paper on African people, non self governing nation held
Mhm.
captive within the United States. And the theme was not accepted because the university claimed they had nobody who understood that concept and had any research background. And I reminded them that John Henry Clark was not too far from them in New York City because this was the university, the New School for Social Research in New York City. And he was not accepted by them.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
I
mm,
refused to do my paper on anything other than that because
Mhm.
we have self agency. We determine what we want to do research on, from my perspective. And
Yeah.
so when the community heard this, they were enraged and
Mhm.
they gave me the title. They said, Doctor, as far as we're concerned.
Listen, okay, that's what I'm
So
talking
exactly.
about.
that was the research. We were going to prove that we are a captive African, non self governing nation within the
Mhm.
United States.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay.
Right.
So that's how we
Well,
got started.
we definitely unite with that.
Thank you.
No, I have. We've had, quite a bit of discussions within about this topic. Specifically, kind of, around this topic. I think, Dr. Davis, you were on the RDP studies when we, started to break into this conversation as
Mhm.
well. And I don't have anything against women who do sex work because it's not about you specifically or individually, but we have to look at this system who once they brought us off, they once they kidnapped us and coerced people to go ahead and kidnap us from the continent of Africa. They pretty much made the whole chattel slavery system off the backs of African women. And you have the Jezebel, theory out there where they made us, they portray us as hypersexual. So that kind
Yes.
of, led to us being violated, sexually. We were reproductive. We was responsible for the reproduction during chattel slavery. Our time is in chattel slavery because they, outlawed, getting more people, kidnapping more people from the continent of Africa. So they didn't have anything, to do to produce more besides breeding us. So, African women had in this country, and I will also say, in the global, because chattel slavery was global. It's not just a United States thing. A lot of us went to the Caribbean, South America, into the United Kingdom, but also on the continent of Africa, the colonialism that took place outside of, after the slavery, like after they raped the African people off the continent, they went ahead and raped the women on the continent, in their way of, satisfying their urges since they were so far away from home. So, African women have played a big part of the in this colonial capitalist system from inception as imperialism all the way into now. I have, like I said, I have nothing against African women who do sex work. I do have a problem with the women and children who are placed in sex trafficking. I have a problem with that. I have a problem with the system, how it puts us in situations where we have no agency, or we're not valued enough in order to see ourselves being worth more, or seeing our value more than, than the body parts that we have. That is a psychological. We was working on, what was the last book we read? Wretched of the Earth. There's a psychological component to that and a material component of that when you look at how African women see, in general, African people in general seem to be, or are placed in, poverty conditions. We are the poor and working class, on purpose, as a generalization, not a specific, because of course you always have exceptions to the rules, and I don't want anyone to hark on the exception. And generally, we are the what, lower class, or lower income, and people. And then if I have to choose, and we have to make hard choices, we have to make choices of, I'm a sole parent, and I'm glad I have wages that can support me and my child, and I have a village that is able to care for him. Because if I had to pay for these child care prices, I don't make enough to pay for these child
No.
care prices, and live a real cost of a real standard of living. I would I have to get in these streets sometimes, if I had those conditions? Absolutely. So I is a lot. I know I'm going on a lot, but I'm gonna give everybody else another a time to talk, because I can go on this forever. We
Yeah, Coco, there's something you said that I wanted to gently push back on, because it's something that I've been diving a little bit deeper into the topic of black male studies, because it's a highly controversial topic, and I think that a lot of people talk about it without actually really knowing what it is, and especially in the black feminist world, we hear a lot of people talk about it as if it's like an oppressive, kind of red pilled mode of thinking. And one of the things that I learned from reading through Black male studies texts is this idea that Black men are treated as if it is not possible for them to be sexually assaulted. That there's this concept of like no such thing as rape against Black men. Like,
is 100%
inherently
is.
sexual. And of course, Black women also have that to a certain extent with the Jezebel trope and stuff like that. But like, uh, all this is to say that, of course, we know that women are the most susceptible to sex trafficking, being in the sex trade because of having to rear children and all these other things. And also, slavery, also sex trafficked men, also was based on the widespread sexual assault of men and boys. And, even thinking about outside of slavery recently, we all know about, Diddy. He got his whatever 60 months, like a third of which is already time served or whatever. And we know, we've seen the videos with Cassie, and it's horrible. It's like the worst thing. It's awful. But the majority of the people that were actually part of that trial were men, were men
Males.
sex traffickers, or not, or men who were sex trafficked, men who were harmed by Diddy. But you don't hear a peep about that, except to say like, oh, no Diddy, no Diddy, kind of that homophobic jest, that plays into this idea that like it's not possible to sexually assault Black men. And there was also a very famous case of a woman who, she worked in a juvenile detention facility, and she got convicted on something like 24 counts of sexual assault of Black boys, and got like 6 months in jail. And so I just wanted to put that in here, because, when we're talking about a global system of sex trade, there's this assumption that I think a lot of feminists play into, that it's the men doing the harm against the women who are the victims of the harm. Whereas there are a lot of women, I mean, what is the name? Ghislaine Maxwell, like
Yeah.
there are plenty of women who are part of the sex trade and are perpetuating the harms. And there are plenty of men and boys who are also victims of the harm. So I just wanted to expand that a little bit
Yeah.
to bring that in, because I feel like that's something that's glossed over if I'm not.
Yeah, I 1000%, agree and unite. I mean, with the breeding farms, they were using men and women, okay? They would bring their female slaves to the breeding farm to breed with, a buck, but even when you think about even George Washington Carver and how he was, you know
I want to I just want
Yeah.
to say that we have some facts here because we're talking about like sex work and the idea that um that the situations that we are empowered when we enter into agreements with that trade sex for money. And there's so many situations that colonialism forces us and decisions that colonialism forces us to do because of the conditions that it's created around women, around vulnerable people, and things like that. For example, we're talking about sex work, but on another note, African women may be forced to have an abortion if they don't want to because or if they really want a child but they can't afford a child, they might go to the abortion clinic, or they may, if family planning is greatly influenced by colonialism, right? And then there may be other things about whether or not you got to pay the rent or you're going to pay the food or go buy food. These are things that are being decided upon when we experience life under colonialism, and sex work is a part of that. And we can't, the liberal or feminist perspective that sex work is something that is a choice, that we are empowered by it. They want to create all these protections around protecting sex work as if it's something that we define for ourselves as a as a way that we want to work to live. I don't know of any human woman, whether she's seen as enjoying pornography or any, I don't know of any human woman who's like, yeah, yeah, I want to grow up to be somebody who trades my sexual self for money, and make that to be the basis for why I live. We are usually forced into making these decisions. I wrote an article and I was just like, when I was younger, a young mom living in Florida, which is one of the most, which is a place that is like really hyper exploits women. There's so many different avenues: sex work, escorts, stripping, all these things. And I'm just like, there's even back in the day when you used to do sex calls, when you can call a 1-800 number and you can dial to get some sweet lady on the other line and come tell you whatever you want to hear. They had those call centers in South Florida too. And like all of this, when I was considering, like, I need a car, I need to pay for school, I need to pay for childcare, and that job at Davis Bridals wasn't covering all of the rent, wasn't covering all of the fees, and something had to, and all of my skills were being exhausted through school and through work, and I didn't have any additional skills that I could trade in order for another kind of income, another kind of job. I didn't have the time. I needed something that was flexible. And for some people, sex work is flexible. And you can come in and make, hit it out in 3 hours, get $1,000 and get out of there. But that is the benefit then of deciding to do that. It is quick money. However, you are,
Mhm.
participating in your own exploitation. And so, part of what we're doing here is just saying that none of these choices that we're making to make ends meet that involve sex work are choices or empowerment per se. I don't care if one will come on here and tell me I'm empowered by being my own sex worker because I could be your own. I don't care. I don't believe that. You know what I mean? And I think that that's really important for us to like lay out. There's a statistic here that says the fact is that Black women and girls are more vulnerable to sex trafficking than any other race, with 40% of all victims and survivors of sex trafficking found to be Black in a 2-year study by the U.S. Department of Justice. I don't know if that's globally, but it sounds like it's the United States. And that's something that we have to really look at, because, and I even think wealthy women, rappers and stuff, are also participating in their own exploitation. They're now the video vixens on the video. They have to sell their bodies. They have to sexualize themselves in a really gross way in order for them to be considered, popular, or to be, tradable for music. Now you have to do that. And, and now we're seeing also like this heightening of um, of the attacks on social welfare programs. Not saying every Black woman is benefiting from social welfare programs, but they're there so that if shit does hit the fan, you got them, and now they're being attacked, right? And these are things that we have to really address and really take, heed in. And I hope that we don't fall into the pocket where we feel like sexual exploitation, voluntary or involuntary, is empowering. Is certainly not empowering for little girls who are, on the streets in some countries, who are put on the stroll by their parents, or who decide themselves that I need to make money to make my, pay for this and that, and decide, little girls and boys. I also want to say this, particularly because there are male sex workers all over the world. There's something called sex tourism. And Jay, you might be able to
Mhm.
talk to this piece because you just went to
I've done a
Tanzania,
lot of
and we saw the reverse, right? These white women and these African men like trading themselves for, yeah, yeah,
boys,
boys,
really.
really. But I wanted to, we all talk. I want to have Sister Dr. Beta Davis jump in. You can talk about this particular topic, but we also, you were sharing something with me at a at a One Africa One Nation farmers, I mean, marketplace in Philly, about some of the benefits that are being attacked, particularly in New York City, and what those mean to the communities that they serve, and how, like, the organizing that went behind it, and how that should be a part of what we are doing. And we're talking about, when we're criticizing sex work as a means of, getting resources, but also, like, what then are we fighting for if we don't have this option, or if we saying we shouldn't, hyper exploit ourselves.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for, inviting me today and for giving me an opportunity to share thoughts and a conversation with others around this issue. Um, and I want to interject some concepts. One of them is the concept of capitalism as decadence. Any
Mm-hmm.
system that bases itself on economic exploitation, from my perspective, is decadence. Where
Mm-hmm.
you have a capitalist system, anything and everything is for sale. And the objective is to get the most for the least amount of the capital. And so this is what sexploitation represents. That's number one. There are some who consider the whole concept of a Western marriage as a concept of you get taken care of for sex on a regular basis and on demand. That is some concept of a Western capitalist marriage where people don't choose each other based on whatever we consider the philosophical concepts of human love, but based on what can I benefit from in this capitalist contract. And where you have contracts that are more important than human rights, then everybody becomes a prostitute. Where you take a
Mm-hmm.
job and you do not service your people, but you
Mm-hmm.
actually are actively complicit in their destruction. As far as I'm concerned, you're a bigger hoe than this little girl who's on the street trying to survive and take care of a child. And until we start saying this and calling out these traitors for what they are, you cannot really analyze capitalism for me. So I just wanted to put that out there. How dare you look down on a 13-year-old prostitute when you've got somebody like Eric Adams? Please don't even think about going there with me. I will not tolerate anybody putting down an economically deprived child in a capitalist country that is the worst empire in the history of the world and judging them when you can't explain to me why we can't prosecute Eric Adams. So I will just leave it there for that. And I'm not
You
kidding
left
about
it
this. I
there.
don't.
You you left it there, and you laid it out. I was like, woof. Then he's like, you a
Okay,
hoe.
so yeah, we're truly
Hoes
blaming
are
the
different.
victim. You're
Yeah.
truly blaming the victim. And the
Yes.
other
Yes.
statistic I
Yes.
have as an
That's so
educator,
true.
20 years ago, New York City mandated that all educators be reporters of abuse and especially sexual abuse. And they came out with a course that every educator had to take. And at that time, 1 in every 3 girls is in danger of sexual abuse by their male father, be it a stepfather or a biological. 1 in 3. 1 in every 9 youth for boys. So this is the country, and everybody knows that sometimes what sets young people on the path to being sexually exploited or to practice this sex trade as a means of income is that they were first the victims of physical abuse sexually, because that's what it is. It is not love. It is physical sexual abuse. And after that, they no longer value their body, and they do end up practicing this trade. So until we put this in perspective of a capitalist, vicious society and what capitalism does, it brings everything down to its lowest common denominator. And this is why it is interesting to me that the person who's now the president is known for having a sex ring of little girls. And there have been testimonies to this effect. And now they're trying to bring out more information. All I say is, this is, to me, the decadence of capitalism. I don't just judge one white male for that. This is the decadence of capitalism. Until we understand that, I think we're all going to be more emotional than we are solution oriented. And a country that is responsible for changing their strategies in terms of captivity in the 18th century, that they would no longer capture adults, but would capture children under the age of 12, because the slave rebellions or the rebellions of the captives on the ships was too successful and too costly. They cannot judge a child that is involved in sex trade. They cannot judge an economically deprived woman trying to feed her family for being involved in what they call the sex trade, because they set this up when they started capturing children under the age of 12 as opposed to adults over 18. It was a strategic change. And since we know that the sexual abuse of the captive women began on the slave ships, you can imagine what happened to the little girls. And where in
I think
Maryland, you had a whole camp that was dedicated to that. To me, that is sexual exploitation as well. They were raped from the minute they had their menses so that they could produce slaves as early as possible. 60% of them died in childbirth because their wombs were too small to carry a birth to fruition. So this is the foundation to me of sexual exploitation in America. It was intimately tied to capitalism. And I won't tolerate any judge, any lawyer, any priest, any pastor judging anybody who was a prostitute in this country. So, having
I
said
think
that,
you raised a couple of good issues here, because we start out the show saying that we're not here to judge people who are engaged in this. We are here to judge the system. And I appreciate you making the correlation between, the fact that exploitation happens in various forms, not just in the sex industry under capitalism. Like, we all are exploited, and in some ways more worse than a prostitute, when you have to sell yourselves in order to do this or do that, and really sell out your people. So I appreciate you come up
Compromise
in here
yourself.
talking about somebody a hoe, because we can call everybody.
thank you. Thank
I
you.
appreciate that, and I
Yeah.
also appreciate the fact that you drew that comparison between Eric Adams and a 13-year-old girl who's working in the street because she's trying to make ends meet, or a 40-year-old mother whose community got devastated because of a drug influence in the community. And we all know that the United States government has a hand in flooding drugs, particularly in the African community, and causing all of these social ills that lead to so many other tethers inside, I mean, inside our community, right? So I appreciate you Yeah,
Careful with that
you
word.
know,
The Adolf
if
Hitler
we're
might be
gonna
on you.
drop fall back to one of our previous episodes. but that, yeah, Betty, I think that that's really really important um because what we say here is like the system itself is the problem. Choices that we
Yes,
make in this system is not the
yes,
problem. It's the system itself that
yes,
forces us to make these horrible decisions or just
yes.
decisions to make ends meet, to do this, to do that, to have this, whatever. Even if you just into sex work because you like nice things, you know you can't afford it otherwise, and you don't have the skills to trade off in order to do that. And even then, it's still not enough. And so, these choices that we make are really informed by the system, which is a parasitic, exploitative
That's the
system that
word I was
takes
looking for.
everything from
Yes.
us, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
parasites. Yes,
Mhm.
economic parasites. That's what capitalism is. And
Yeah.
one of the reasons I
Yeah.
appreciate the uh, ANWO and is that their philosophy is based on the philosophy of the African People's Socialist Party, which definitely identifies the concept of capitalism as an economic form of exploitation of workers
Mhm.
and the children of workers. So when you put it within that context, we should not allow anybody who has chosen this as a career, if they have, or is the victim of this, as due to economic need and exploitation, to be judged in that manner. And the whole community ought to embrace these people and protect them, especially those who are young. If not us, then who?
Well,
And I
then
say
what
that
do
as
we
an educator and as a guidance counselor.
Mhm.
what then do we do to protect these people? I want to ask the questions for the whole round. Like, what does protection look like?
I
Go
have
ahead, Jay.
thoughts. One thing that I think is also important to bring into this conversation, especially like people like myself who do a lot of decriminalization work, the question of decriminalization versus legalization comes up all the time. And for a long time, everybody was all about the legalization framework. And, I've had to explain this so many times that when we embed an exploitative system into a legal framework, into a framework of the state, then the state is incentivized to increase the exploitation so they get more money back. So the legalization scheme, just like how, with marijuana, I mean, I'm in a state where marijuana is now legal, and I'm paying way more than I was paying when I was just, and it's highly regulated. But the state is getting a bunch of those taxes. And so if the state is getting taxes, the state is getting regulatory fees off of women's bodies. Do you think they're going to be invested to make sure those women are safe, are taken care of, are not being forced to do what they're doing, or are they going to be incentivized to make as much money as possible? It's obvious. So, I'm always trying to pull people away from the legalization framework to a decriminalization framework, because women should not be going to jail for being in these situations where they're desperate. And in fact, the fact that it is illegal actually makes
Hmm.
them more
Yeah.
endangered, because then that adds a legal risk to where, if somebody finds out about what's happening, now they're in a system, they're part of a public record, and for certain people they would kill before they would let that happen, you
Hmm.
know and so that's why I wanted to bring that in, because we often hear this idea of legalizing sex work as a way um to support sex workers. But I mean, you can go to Germany, you can go to places where you can go to Nevada, where it's legal, and you can look at the trafficking rates. I mean, Nevada has one of the highest trafficking rates in the entire country, and that's like the only state where it's actually legal. I don't think that's a coincidence at all. And so I think it's important to also like bring these things in when we're talking about like being solution minded. It has to be decent. It can't be legalization.
One of the other things I'd like to bring into this discussion is that we don't deal with just what you are talking about when we talk about domestic workers, and how it's almost like it comes with the job territory, that at some point, as a house cleaner, you have got to fight for the right to say, I draw the line with sleeping with you to keep this job. But so many of our domestic workers coming out of the South, in the South, coming from another country to this country for the first time, this is these are the choices they are met with. And so when you're talking about someone of this in this situation saying, if I'm going to be treated like a prostitute, then I want more control over the economics. Because here I am, I'm cleaning this house, I'm taking care of the kids, and I have to be subjected to rape every night as well. I might as well be a prostitute. I'm a lot safer because at least I'll have somebody to protect me. And if I want to say I don't want to work tonight, so it the discussion needs more than just a moral, religious interpretation. If you don't put it within the context of capitalism being an exploitative economic system, nothing will work. It won't work. Nothing will work.
I think it's also important for us to say, like, too, the solution is to organize. Like, I wrote an article
Yes,
one time too, that talked about let's organize
yes,
African prostitutes, right? Like, because if you
yes.
in it, then
Mhm.
it would be dope if you were, a revolutionary person. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
that the end goal is to like liberate ourselves from this exploitative system, not only as a prostitute yourself or somebody working in the sex industry, but as African people who desire a free, liberated world, right? But we have to first start with a free and liberated Africa, that we can create the space that can provide all the things that are necessary for us to live without like exploiting ourselves or being forced to exploit ourselves because the economy and things like that don't allow us to do that in a way that capitalism loves to do that. And if we talk about capitalism as a system in and of itself, it started with the trafficking of human beings. It started
That's
with
right.
this widespread violence and sexualization of African people. And African people. I say this because they even did it to African men. Look at their penises; they cut them off and put them in
Yes,
jars.
yes,
Um,
yes,
they took pictures of African women's behinds and put those in jars. And we talk about Sarah Bartman and other kinds of African women who were put on display for the benefit of white people who couldn't get enough of our bodies because it was so odd to them.
And they're prostituted
And then
at
she
night, though.
died from syphilis, right? Like
Yeah.
yeah, she died from
Syphilis.
syphilis because she was also being
Mhm.
used as a sexual tool. So like we have to see that the parasitic system of capitalism is intertwined with this idea, not with the idea, but the very real real experiences of sexual exploitation. The one cannot exist without the other, and there's no coincidence
exactly.
that
Yes,
that
Yeah.
the most like next to drug smuggling, that sexual exploitation is $1 trillion business throughout the world. Sexual
yes.
trafficking
And it
and
involves the
sexual,
trafficking of children.
yes, it does.
Yeah.
Every time
And
there's a
the
war in
trafficking of
Africa,
children, yeah, it's
there
all
are more
connected.
children who are being trafficked all over the
Hmm.
world as sex shop objects. That's what makes the Epstein investigation so important because this was trafficking of
Mhm.
children. And this goes way, way
Yeah.
back in Western
Absolutely.
economic culture. This is
Hmm.
their economic culture.
Mhm.
That there was no limit. There are
Yeah.
no
And we
moral
were the
limits.
original capital as enslaved people. Mhm.
But I want to relate
Yeah.
this
Sorry, I cut you
to
off.
why it was so important when the a lot of the Jewish women who were communists in New York City first came here, and their parents were communists. One of the first things they did was try to establish daycare centers because they knew that many of these women worked in factories where there was no such thing as limiting workers' hours. They knew that they lived in tenement houses that were not safe, and that many of them, because they did not have babysitters at home, their children were in these apartments that were death camps. They were fire traps, and a child alone could die from almost anything because the circumstances of their daily lives was so hazardous. And so, one of the things they first campaigned for was daycare centers and accountable kindergartens because many of the public schools started with first grade, did not start with kindergarten or
Hmm.
pre-K. And then before pre-K, you must have daycare centers. And so, as communist women, they advocated for this so that the women could relax, that their children were safe when they were at work and had no control over what their working hours were. And so this is how the whole issue of daycare centers and kindergartens, let's not forget the pre-K kindergartens, became a political issue of liberation for working class women.
And I think that's where we kind of, when yesterday asked, what can we do? Like these Uhuru Kijijis is that's part of self, African self determination is to set up Kijiji so that we can take care. And my family is great for this. I've always got kids in my house because we take care of these kids so that we have the freedom to be able to do things that we need to do, things that we want to do. If I want to go to the gym, I need somebody to watch my kid. If I want to go to work, I have to go into work sometimes. So if I have to go into work, I need somebody to take care of my kid instead of paying $350 a week for some institution that probably just give my
What
child
would a liberated
a,
Africa look like?
a
In my view, all these places will have childcare. You go to the gym,
Yes.
childcare.
correct
You go to work, childcare.
child
Everywhere,
care.
childcare.
Child care.
One of the
It'll be
things we fought for,
for
By
me to
people
be a
that you can
conscription.
trust.
Like somebody throughout society
Correct.
will have to participate in the conscription of childcare throughout the entire country until we solve this problem. Because just like you can get conscripted to go to war, you need to be conscripted to be responsible for the next generation of children,
yes,
and you got to put in a year
Correct.
going throughout the country being conscripted to do childcare.
within that
Absolutely.
I would
context,
love to see
I
that.
would love to see
within that
that.
context in New York
Do you
City,
understand?
the idea of childcare was developed even further. And they had something that they called life programs. And I can't remember the complete meaning of the acronym, but it was understood that some young women, while they are in high school, may become pregnant and not want to drop out of high school. Up until then, it was a stigma. You had to drop out because other girls might get pregnant if they saw you were pregnant and coming to class pregnant. With the life program,
Like it's
you never
contagious.
dropped out of school all through your pregnancy. And when you had your child, there was a daycare in the high school, certain high schools, especially working class neighborhoods, where your child was being cared for at a certain age.
Does that even
I
exist
also
anymore?
want to say that
When I was
many
growing
of
up,
It does exist at some schools. When I lived in Memphis, they had a couple schools that had them there because Memphis has a very high teen pregnancy rate. So, in areas where they do have I think they even have a couple schools in Portland too that do this as well. So
And that's
some places
one of
they
the
do.
social economic issues that lead to sex work is not being able to finish high school. I mean,
thank you.
it used to be that
Yes,
high school was like the bare
yes,
minimum that you need to get a job. Now you almost have to have a bachelor's degree to work at
yes,
McDonald's.
yes.
Okay. So, it's very important that we have programs like that they exist. But since we are the thing with capitalism is they take those are the first programs to be
Thank you.
taken out,
Yes,
not
yes.
ROTC, not these other, it's always these type of programs that help students stay engaged into
Mm-hmm.
school in order to finish, in order to be, able to be a productive member of society. But since they take those out, and it's institutional. That's the parasitic nature. It's like, you get pregnant, they want you now, I got you. You get pregnant in high school, I got you. Because now it's almost that's one of the school to prison pipelines. You end up dropping out of school because you have a baby. You end up engaging into sex work. You get arrested for the sex work. Then CPS comes in and take your
Yes,
child, and
yes,
then you are going crazy because you don't have your
yes.
child. and you
Yes.
locked up in prison, and they're able to do whatever they want to do with you, including getting you connected, get you hooked on
And I want
drugs,
to make this even
which
further.
starts as
I'd like
alcoholic.
to interject here. Many of you know that our beloved political prisoner, Mir Abu Jamal, everybody knows he's innocent. They found documents that prove that he's innocent. But let's not forget the main witness who subsequently on her deathbed, dying of cancer, confessed that she lied when she said she saw him perpetrating a crime against this police officer. And she told why she did it. She was the prostitute for the police in Philadelphia, and they threatened to take her children if she did not give false testimony against Mumia Abu Jamal. So I want to put this in the context of a real reality story and how it impacts on our daily lives. This is decadence and this is corruption. The second point I want to point out is that we have contradictions within our own culture, because on occasion, as an assistant principal of guidance in my school, some of the parents in the PTA were upset with me because I advocated for a life program. She said that encourages children to get pregnant. And so it is our duty, it is our obligation to fight against this type of metaphysical imperialism. There's also the attitude of males in the society. If you are pregnant by someone out of wedlock, then you are a hoe. And so that also sets them on the path to prostitution. I see you're laughing. I guess I'm being too old fashioned.
Because you on point. You on point. That's just how it goes.
And so, as mothers,
There is you
even
don't.
if we have not birthed a child, we are all mothers in the sense that we are responsible for every African child in our village. It is our duty to resist that type of misinformation, or what I call metaphysical imperialism. There's no such thing as a spoiled fruit. And that's the
Right.
phrase they use about African youth that become pregnant.
I want to
Yes.
Yeah, not to mention, there's all these studies that talk about how the majority of people that are impregnating the teenagers are grown
Grown
adults.
ups,
So, there's
adults,
that aspect of it too,
teachers,
where these children oftentimes are not even making a real, I mean, they're definitely, as children, not making an informed choice,
but not
but they're
making
being often groomed into
correct.
these sexually exploitative relationships, quote unquote relationships, that might get them pregnant, might actually turn into trafficking situations.
Hmm.
Seen that with, what was her name? Centoya Brown, who
Yeah,
was in jail for what, 15 years for
yeah.
murdering one of the Johns
Yes,
that threatened her
yes.
life. And she got into that as like a 13 or 14-year-old because of her quote unquote boyfriend who, basically groomed her into doing that work. And so, I mean, there's that piece of it too, where, it's not like they find their boyfriend, best friend, and somehow they get into this relationship and then they get pregnant. It's oftentimes, an exploitative one in terms of the age, but also in terms of the pressures that are put on,
Hmm.
especially Black girls, where they're treated as adults from youth,
Yep.
from childhood. They're treated as if they're adults. They wear hair a certain way and they're suddenly fast. They dance in our traditional African styles and suddenly they're doing too much, or they're doing whole things, or whatever, this and that. And I know that there's a lot to be said about the way in which culture over sexualizes Black girls. Like, I think that is true. Like, we can hold multiple truths at once, where there is a lot of music out there that I think is maybe overly sexual, that maybe is inappropriate for a youth to try and imitate. And also, Black bodies have been sexualized since the inception. I mean, you mentioned Sarah Bartman. There's this book, Fearing the Black Body, that talks a lot about this,
Hmm.
where just having a black butt, like a big butt, was they attached a moral weight onto these physical attributes, having large breasts, having a black butt, like these things. They attach, the colonizers attached morality to things that are neutral. They're just body parts. And in parts of Africa they wouldn't cover them because they were just that just wasn't part of the culture. And so they were sexualized and they were assumed to be these naturally sexual Jezebel like creatures that could just be used, like a fleshlight, like a living fleshlight that has no value in and of its own. And we still see that to this day in the way that like young girls or black young girls are treated.
And
There's
this
a
is
there's a
not just an
this
issue of Africans. I have to insist, when you look at these so-called French, what would they call modernists, they're all painting these pictures of the island women, women of the Pacific Islands, the same sexuality, the same treatment of these young girls in their paintings. When you look at what they did when they came to America and saw the First Nation people, the word squaw means vagina. So this pattern
Mm,
is coming out of their culture, not ours. And I think it's important to say that.
mm-hmm.
Who are these people that created a culture that denigrates women to that extent?
I wanna jump in here. Couple of reasons. First of all, I just want to say
Try.
that when they say that prostitution is the oldest, what they call it, the old occupation in the
Occupation.
Profession.
world, in Europe, in Europe, because that
Right.
prostitution for the most part, as this widespread trade of bodies, didn't exist in places that had abundance, like in Africa, and in other places like the Americas before the colonizer came and settled there. And the oldest, it may be old, but it's for white women too. Like these are the things that are being set up in Europe, which was scarcity or produced scarcity
Because there's
there.
social
And there's a whole bunch
politics.
of and the idea of the sexualization of women and the property and the patriarchy and all these things that say that women are the position of men and can be done with whatever way. And then I also wanted to say here that another statistic that I wanted to bring in. It says 66% of commercial sex industry impacted study participants reported suffering periods of homelessness or housing instability. And participants frequently shared that they engaged in sex work during bouts of homelessness or when struggling to meet basic needs such as securing short term lodging, paying inflated rents, or providing for their children. And
Yes,
I just want to say
yes,
that, yes, all of that. Um, and maybe people who may not be women are also engaged in this because rent is high. Rent is high. And I do
mhm,
know that there was a situation here in Baltimore at a housing project where the janitor or the person who was managing the housing project would often, when things would break down in somebody's apartment, he would then try to trade his services
yes,
for sexual exploit. So the very base, if you got a hole that's letting in mice and you want that junk patched, you got to now
yes,
trade your vagina, or whatever part of your body for that to be fixed because you don't know how to do that. And so
Right.
these are the things that leave our people vulnerable. And if we just had proper housing, if we had the necessary, if we have housing to house everybody. You know what I mean?
Right. We got enough housing in
To
this
house
country to house
everybody,
every
but the
single
scarcity, the
person.
creation of the scarcity provides the opportunity for this vulnerable, parasitic, exploitative situation to happen.
Sister yesterday, the first book, novel that was written that talked about the inner life of a black child, I think it was called Daddy Was a Numbers Runner. And there is a horrific scene in that book which talks about how this child was treated in such a degrading sexual way when she went to the grocery store to purchase um, groceries by the grocery store owners. In addition to that, I grew up in a project in Brooklyn, and every girl in that project, including myself, remembers as a child feeling funny about the way the dentist touched us um, when we were children. And of course, Africans have beautiful teeth. The other thing was clear was that a lot of us had drilling when we had no cavities. So it wasn't just the exploitation in terms of the medical treatment you were supposed to be getting for your teeth, which was a lie because Africans have beautiful teeth. It was also the fact that the dentist took advantage of young girls in those situations as well. So this attitude isn't, you don't have to be poor to have it happen. All you need is a culture of
Correct.
silence. And secondly, with regard to the struggle that ANWO is waging to stop slave catching. Let's be real. If the unions did their job, they would advocate the way these European American communist women did for daycare, a wraparound daycare service from the moment the mother drops the child off till the time the mother comes to pick up that child, no matter how late in the evening it is. And then you could guarantee there would be no abuse based on economic exploitation. And I'm sorry if I took up too much time to say that.
You didn't. We're gonna go
No.
into some announcements, and then we got some questions that we pinned in the chat. So if you got some questions, pin your questions and or put your questions in, and then we'll get to them in the next section. Thank
And
you.
could you
Go ahead,
text
Coco.
me the link to
Okay.
donate, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. So, as yesterday mentioned, we are going into the uh, question and answering part, but we do have some announcements to go over. We are wrapping up today's program, and I hope that you're motivated to contribute to AMWO and the programs of AMWO and the renovation of the Mecca for African women in the form of AMWO Liberation Center. But before closing out, we have some important announcements. Reminder, we have a $250 resource goal. AMWO is not a nonprofit. So our operation comes off membership dues and donations and the revolutionary equity of African women and supporters. So if you are African women and you are, enjoying this program and you're inspired and you're African women anywhere on this globe, we call on you to join the African National Women's Organization, ANWO. Again, we are the only anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, revolutionary organization for Black women. We have members in Africa, Europe, Latin America, and all around the United States. And was leading, as you could tell by this conversation, and was leading on everyday issues concerning African women. We're not just on the internet. We are on the ground in our communities organizing for African liberation. Join the International Collective of African Women, building the revolutionary capacity of African women. To learn more about membership and to join, visit annualuhuru.org/join. Okay, this shirt, I love this shirt. This is my favorite shirt. Wear your politics with AMWO. AMWO shop features t-shirts, sweatshirts, travel bags, mugs, hoodies, and even socks. So, order at annualuhuru.org/storefronts. Consider or don't consider, just become a decolonizer, which that's what we call our distributors and customers of Decolonase Hair and Body. Decolonase Hair and Body are natural personal care products that highlights ingredients and traditional care practices used by indigenous people all around the world. In addition to featuring images and quotes of African revolutionaries, they are good. I don't go anywhere without my kapawasu and nettle, a little stick balm. Me and my son everywhere, from our butters to our conditioners to the oils. Decolonase has you covered from head to toe. Make your next purchase of personal care products from us at decolonase.com. If you like our programming and would like to help us produce more shows, um, please consider volunteering with us. AMWO is looking for interpreters, video editors, researchers, chat moderators for future broadcasts and programs. If you want to donate your skills, email us at info@annualuhuru.org. Um, All member meeting coming up this October 18th, 2025. Join African National Women's Organization, AMWO, for an all member meeting on Saturday, October 18th at 12 p.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Central Time, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, We'll be discussing exciting updates, our campaigns, and how to stay involved with AMWO because it's time, as yesterday said, it's time to organize. You know, the time is now. So register if you are an active member, register for the meeting. If you want to become a member, go ahead and go to annualuhuru.org/join so you can join this meeting as well. Lastly, the Harriet's Daughters Book Club and study group are monthly virtual and in-person meetings led by the African National Women's Organization. It is a mass book club and study group that come together to discuss books and other literature that centers on African liberation themes. We invite you to join whether you have read the book or not. It's always a great discussion. Our October selection is Gender Nation Class in the First Intifada by Aitamad Muhana. She examines the decline of the Palestinian leftist movement during the First Intifada, which was 1987 and 1993, and the impact of the rise of Hamas on the Palestinian gender norms. The First Intifada was a largely nonviolent Palestinian struggle that was a collective social, economic, and political mobilization led by women. So, and Harriet's Daughters Book Club will analyze and connect the historical relevance to modern day anti colonial movements. Mahana examines the decline of the, I'm sorry. All right, yeah. So the next discussion will be on Sunday, October 12th. That's next Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific, and all the, time zones in between. And it's open to African women, fans, and those who are in solidarity with AMWO. Visit amwoahuru.org/events to stay up to date on all upcoming international, national, regional, and local events and programs. Uhuru. That's always a mouthful.
I'm like, Flamity, if I'm saying it right, we want you to buy all our merch too. We're going to promote that a lot more so that we can get.
Listen,
Yes,
I'm always
yes.
I need more. I'm always decked out. Like, yes, the Kawawasi. Listen, I was so happy to get that little one because normally I'm like, I'm not even gonna show you what my current one looks like now. It is beat up.
That's the
Here we go.
Kawasu in
It is
metal.
beat up. It's beat up. When I say I always got it, I always
Yes,
got it.
yes.
Like we just went
Yeah, girl, hit that
swimming
elbow.
today,
Hit that
so
elbow. Okay.
I'm ashy. You know what
I saw it.
we
I saw it. All right. Well,
we just went
let's get into some
swimming.
Q&A. So we've pinned a
All
few.
right, we have some good Q and
We've
A's
pinned a
too.
few.
Yeah, some great
Yeah.
questions in here.
Yeah, whatever you want to queue up for us, Miriam. All right, from Comrade Don, what is the internationalist perspective on the current state of the
You said
Epstein
African
debacle?
internationalist perspective.
African international.
You said
What I
internationalist.
say?
Difference.
Oh, sorry, African international. We know that's something totally different.
Who
Okay.
wants to take?
I have
Go
so
ahead.
many thoughts. I don't even know where to begin with how many thoughts I have. But we know from the beginning of this country that the people that have been in charge have always been sex traffickers that have always been abusing women and girls, especially marginalized in either economic or racial ways. That has happened since before this was even an independent country. That's since the colonizers landed on these shores, that has been a part of our governing framework. So, I don't think that this is anything new. I think this is a continuation of the way that our country has always been. I think the only thing that is relatively new is the Israel honeypot piece of it, where now we have different norms. The past 40, 50 years, we've shifted our norms. It's not acceptable to exploit little girls anymore, even though we know that the people in power do it, right? There's this tacit, admission that, like, yes, they all do it, but we can't talk about it. We can't admit it because then that makes us question what kind of country we are, what kind of people are our leaders. And so we can't have that. So it has to be under wraps, right? That's where the Israel comes in. Because Israel without the direct support of US leaders, could never function as a country in any kind of capacity. And as Israel keeps doing stuff to both the Palestinians, but also to people who aren't even the Palestinians. I mean, they sunk the U.S. liberty. Like, they've done stuff to the people in the United States. It's not just, I mean, obviously the majority of the oppression from Israelis is onto the Palestinians. I don't want to diminish the suffering that they're going through. Um, but the point being that Israel took advantage of the shifting norms and decided that they were going to put into place a honeypot operation where they were going to find economically exploited girls in Palm Beach, 14, 15-year-olds, promise them good jobs doing massages, and then basically force them into sex slavery, trafficking, and then they were going to take photos and videos of the politicians engaging in the sexual abuse of these young girls, and then use that against them in order to keep Israel's power. So all that's to say, to summarize, this has been happening since the beginning of the country. This has always happened before the beginning of the country. This was happening in Europe. Pocahontas was a 14-year-old girl when she was trafficked to Europe, and she died young. I believe it was in childbirth while she was like still a teenager. And so we know that they've been trafficking girls before the US was even a nation. The new aspect of it is the honeypot piece, where they're using the depravities of the people in power, the decadence of the people in power, in order to maintain Israel supremacy and Zionist supremacy. So that's what I'll say about that. But I'm curious what other folks have to say about it.
I don't. I think you covered it, comrade. So we can move to the next
Yeah,
question.
I think you hit all
Yeah.
the points. I mean, I don't think we ever will see that list, but we know who the players are. So who cares? This is the only reason why, like, is highlighting sex trafficking and exposing a layer of sex trafficking, but it's still not the majority of the people who are being sex trafficked. It's not stopping it. It's not going to stop it. So the only thing that's going to stop it is revolution. Like, unfortunately to say, so fortunate but fortunately, the only thing that's going to stop this or reduce it is to have revolution. You have to kill the parasite, and so that we can have a more, we want a more equitable future for African women, children, and men. We have to get rid of the colonizer.
Bro, let's get to the next question. Thank you so much,
A
comrade.
cleanse, a
What's the
detox.
next question?
There's a question around, I don't know if it was, yeah, actually, here, I'll put it here. So it was around co-ops. Oh, nope,
Mhm.
that's not the one.
No,
That
that's
was
enough.
the wrong one. Is this it? Oh, wait, no, go ahead and answer this one, actually. Is
Yeah.
this situation with the slum manager it went away. We'll bring it back. An example of horizontal violence. I'm thinking of one of your articles, Prez. So I'm guessing this is
Yeah,
for
it
yesterday.
is. It's a horizontal violence situation. And when we say horizontal
And petty
violence, it means
bourgeois.
that violence that happens inside the colony amongst colonized people, and the ways that we take advantage of each other, the way that we harm each other because of the conditions that were imposed upon us. And so if there's an opportunity to manipulate and do that, then somebody who is, tied to oppression or want to oppress and use this to gain power or significance over somebody else will use these sort of opportunities to oppress another person. So it is an example of horizontal violence. There is,
I'm wondering, I want to push back a little bit because I think it depends. It's very much depends on the situation, right? Where so are you talking about like a slum manager who like lives in the slum but is also maybe the
yes,
super and
yes.
oppressing other people?
Yeah.
So I think that it very much depends because that super is in an economic position that is somewhat different. I mean, they're not a capitalist. They don't own the means of production or anything like that, but they are in a different economic position than the people that actually had to pay
Mhm,
for the rent. And so the people that actually had to pay for the rent, they're in an economically oppressed position, versus the super is often
mhm,
living there for free. And so there's a slight, class difference that the manager, the slum manager, can weaponize against somebody that is in more of a class a lower class status. I mean, it's not the same thing
Mhm.
as a landlord. It's not the same thing as a landlord and a tenant. Like, obviously, that is a very sharp distinction in terms of like the class piece of it. But even so, I think that it could be like it could be more hierarchical, because when I think about horizontal violence, I might think of like how um a Native woman and a Black woman, like a Native woman being anti-Black, or a Black woman being anti-Native, and so you I think more of that, where they might not necessarily hold some kind of power over one another. But anywhere where there's like a power differential, I wouldn't necessarily consider that to be as much horizontal violence, even though yes, the class differential is not
Yeah,
that
the
big.
class doesn't really factor in. It's because you're a colonized African person and you're inflicting, despite the fact that there's a class difference. It's the fact that horizontal is amongst the African population and vertical is from outside of the African population, and that's the context under which I'm saying if the super is a slumlord, well, a super in a building that is also filled with other African people who are experiencing this, he has an opportunity to not do this, but he does engage in that. And just like the same two young people who kill themselves or shoot at each other on the street, that's horizontal violence. One may be from a different class than another. Sometimes that happens, and it's still horizontal violence. So for me, it's still in that realm of it's horizontal violence regardless of the class nuance, but um, but it is something that we have to put a class analysis onto, right? Like to, and I also think that somebody who's a super of a building, I think they still the African working poor working class, especially of a project housing. I ain't never seen somebody who got free housing and then project housing being like the upper middle class or something like that. You're usually poor working class African. And the people who are living there, although they have to pay for their rent, are also poor working class. So you're still within that same class structure. Um, Comrade, let's go to the next one. It's for Dr. Betty. That's the next one. And it says, can Comrade Betty Davis go deeper into the creation of preschool and kindergarten?
I did pre yes. First of all, if you check your local federal guidelines coming down from the state for preschool and kindergarten, that's one of the guidelines you can use. You can also go to your local community boards, education boards, and demand, if they don't have a preschool budget, that they include one. And you can put it underneath just what we are advocating for of the Child Care Acts in different city, state, and federal guidelines. Um, there are also private daycare programs in most communities. You should research them, look at their guidelines, and then Anwar was famous for this, especially in St. Louis. Create your own dual and contending powers and submit for a government funding for your daycare center. In New York City, we had this until Eric Adams catered to the charter schools and defunded a lot of the daycare centers. What some people did in New York was they then went to the unions and requested that the unions advocate and sponsor daycare centers for working class peoples. Also, fight for a life program in your high school. That's a very important issue because it not only supports the children, it supports the mothers and takes away from the stigma within the community when you do that.
It's
And
also
if
like
you
an attack on
Google
like
LYFE for New York
oh why.
City, implement LYFE, uh, it, the programs will come up. We still have them in spite of Eric Adams in some of the high schools.
Thank you, comrade. Let's try to get through all these questions, and then if we have any last thoughts, let's do it. Um,
Yeah. Before we get into that, is a comment here. We need to know where to find more Dr. Betty Davis because she's spitting, and I think I don't know. I always end up in places
Well, one of the things
with
I
you,
wish
Dr.
people
Becky,
would
where you're
do
sitting here
is to
sitting.
tune into our WBAI broadcasts,
Mhm.
WBAI 99.5 FM. And anytime Anwar wishes to have access to our listeners, New York City always welcomes them. And Sister yesterday, Comrade
Mhm.
yesterday knows it's an open door policy. This whole issue around um, capitalism and economic exploitation. That's what it is. People just get all emotional over sex. Stop it. It's capitalism.
I always
Yep.
relate you to the
Always boils
Black
down to capitalism.
community control of
Mm-hmm.
education is like the banner I put you on, because we think about satisfying these different, like you said, dual and contending powers and these programs. We have to get community control of our
Yes.
education. You mentioned that with the with creating preschools and kindergartens, but all education in general. I mean, is the next comment I see here is about the Uhuru Kijiji, and so I think we really have to bringing this up, like what is needed to
One second,
reignite
one
Uhuru
second
Kijiji, and
before we
that's
move to that
And
question. I
can
just
I
wanted
just
to
give a
get
shout out to the job in St. Louis, what you guys have done,
yes,
fighting for the
yes,
public school system, fighting
yes,
with the alderman, whose name I
yes.
can't remember right now.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the struggle you
Jesse
did for
Todd.
doulas, because
Mm,
before they are children in school, they have to
yes,
get here, they have to be born.
mhm,
And our infant mortality rate is definitely tied to the type of treatment they get once they get here. I mean, unless you
Sister
understand
Betty,
capitalism and colonialism, you cannot fight against the issue of sexual exploitation. It's
you
all
cannot.
one. Don't get caught
Yeah.
up in the emotional BS.
I wanted to get your information again so we can share it with people. So you said WBAI 99.5 FM. And what days should people be listening into you?
We're on Wednesday evenings, and it's 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. And we're on for 55 minutes. And especially as you are waging struggles against the National Guard, we are featuring that. Wherever there is a Black homeless population, they are targeting that city because there's an agenda to fill up these cop cities that they have. You people, you have to begin to connect the dots. And that is why whenever Anwo or MPDUM or Black is Back calls me, I answer. You have to have a philosophy to fight oppression. Oppression is based on a philosophy. You have to fight it with the philosophy. And you have to assume that you don't know everything. And no one can win this struggle alone. And so when you join a group like ANWA, when you join a group like MPDUM or the African People's Socialist Party, you are guaranteeing that when you fight, you will win.
Thank you, comrade. Listen, we
No,
gotta have
thank
Ooh.
you.
we
Thank
gotta
you.
have Dr. Betty back on the show. But let's get through these last few questions. Don asks, what is needed to reignite Uhuru Kijiji? By that, I mean professionally, what skills and qualifications does AMO need at its disposal? We just need people, willing participants
correct.
who are interested in solving the problem of and creating a dual and contending power structure. So wherever you are, if you're interested in creating a network that supports yourselves or other African women and other African families who have children, then that's the only qualification that you need. And I mean, of course, we do some safety checks. You know what I mean? But like, we everybody ain't gonna get in the circle. And it's gonna
Everybody
be
can't be in
community
there,
based, so
but
people will know each other. Like we don't just pluck people out. A community creates a Kijiji. We don't just say a Kijiji is gonna be here and we hire people. A community says, "I want a Kijiji. I know my neighbor. She knows this person. We all live in the same area. Let's get this Kijiji together and work together to solve this problem of childcare." And so that way we keep each other
yeah,
safe. That way we solve the problem of having, whether it may not be all day childcare. Maybe like, listen, can you watch my kid? I'm about to go down to the grocery store.
dropping.
It'd be wonderful if they stay with you for like 30 minutes. it starts like that and it can build out. But I would just say there's no professional skills that you need to have other than the desire to work with each other and help to mitigate the impact of colonialism through a collective raising of or sharing childcare with each other.
Sister
Uh,
yesterday, I would like to
yes.
recommend that the people who are participating in this discussion study our comrades who are in solidarity with us in education in California, because they are
Mm-hmm.
constantly struggling as a dual and contending power for community control of the public education funds. And I would like
Mm-hmm.
to explain to you that one of the first documents that's on a record of the Africans who were captives in this country was to establish a public education system. The reason they did not want private schools is they did not want to be whole to pilgrim missionaries. They did not want to be under the control of the slave plantation owners' philosophy of what a good slave should be. The public school system that they set up during the Black Reconstruction period clearly gave control of the schools to the local parents. And one of the things I want to call your attention to, the majority of the public schools and the majority of the European American parents' children are in public schools. They are not in charter schools. That is because it is under their control. And I want to say that again. Do the math. Anytime they want to give you,
We're gonna have you
anytime
back,
they want to give you
and we're gonna
something,
talk
you
about it.
want to investigate it. Why do they want to give you charter schools? And yet the majority of their women and their children are in the public school system, because they control those budgets, they control those contracts. And nothing in this capitalist system is easy. The American capitalist infrastructure is one of the most complex bureaucracies in the history of the world. So stop acting like children. Join an organization that teaches you how to study. You cannot win a revolution just screaming hallelujah. You got to learn, you got to
All
study.
right.
And this is what ANWO, an African People's Socialist Party, helps you do. I want to thank you for letting me say that.
Uhuru.
Man, the clips that's coming out of this program, I'm already. We got one last question here. I have only one question. How can revolutionaries bridge the gap and be more in community with sex workers and vice versa? As a CW, I'm often thinking about this.
I have thoughts about this. I'm assuming that CW stands for community or community health worker, community worker. And there's another question that was about sex workers making co-ops, and so I wanted to talk
Mhm.
about both of these questions because I think that they're related in the sense that so I live in Portland. Portland has the most number of sex what is it strip clubs per capita out of any state in the U.S. You can throw a stone and hit a strip club, and so it's also a very high sex trafficking place as well as being a port city. I'm in community with a lot of sex workers here because we also have a very depressed job market. There's not a lot of jobs here, so a lot of people, especially people that are moving from the South, that are looking, they're often queer, they're trans, they weren't accepted in the South. They moved to Oregon to, get better benefits, but also to find a new life and acceptance. There's no jobs here, so they often fall into sex work. And a couple things that I'll say. And so, in terms of the co ops, so we have multiple co ops here. Most of them have risen up in direct response to exploitation by the strip club owners. And so, I would say, like, if you can get out there and talk to sex workers, talk to strippers, ask them, are you getting your money? Like, are you know what I mean? Like, ask them these questions about like how they feel about their work. Are they being exploited by the people who own the clubs? Because they often are. They often are heavily exploited financially, sexually. And so really making those direct connections with sex workers and letting them know that you are a trusted person and that you are willing to support them. Oftentimes, you know, there's different organizations here that will get them supplies that they need, get them all sorts of things. I would say get involved with that and also just ask them what they need. One of my former roommates actually started a business. The business is called Meals for 6-inch Heels because she noticed that at the end of the strip, when the strip club closes, usually about 3 or 4 a.m., everything's closed. The places that aren't closed don't deliver, and you have to like walk into the hood and maybe dangerous neighborhoods. And, you know, they're in their garb often, you know, it was putting them at risk just to get food. And so a lot of them were just starving. They would just, you know, not eat anything. And so she started to deliver food. And that's her business model, is that she caters for people. She makes most of her money through catering people, but she also delivers food to sex workers and to strippers that need to eat, you know, because we all need to eat, obviously. And so that's what I would say is really maintain those connections, really be able to ask people directly what their needs are, because every person has different needs and we're not going to necessarily know what people's needs are unless we ask them about those needs. And, you know, in terms of the co-ops thing, co-ops I think is an excellent temporary strategy, just like all co-ops are. The goal is to get to beyond to where you need to work to live. That's the goal. The goal is I shouldn't need to have a job in order to be able to eat, be able to have food over my head, whether I'm a sex worker or not. So co-ops is a good intermediary. At least I own my own labor. At least no one else can exploit me because I'm my own manager or owner or whatever. But the goal is you shouldn't have to do that at all to even be able to eat or to survive or anything. So it's a great temporary solution, not a great permanent solution. But it's something that overall I support if it gets them what they need today in this moment. So I'll say that. I don't know if I know we're over time, but I'm curious if anyone else has any last thoughts about that.
I think those are all like really great, important parts, you know. I think once we were actually in St. Louis, not me personally, but then we had an organizer in St. Louis who was um, talking to the prostitutes that were out on the streets, and they were engaged in some struggle with some other prostitutes, and you know there was a thing there. I think that the critical thing is you have to be a part of it. You have to not see these people as an enemy or some sort of pariah in a community, but they are part of the community, whether we, you know, whether you have an opinion about it, good or not. And they are engaged in solving problems that are related to their life. And so if you're not also involved in decisions or struggles that are related to them solving problems related to their life, then it's going to be really hard for us to really intervene and share even the opinions that we have. So I would just say that we just have to be connected with these individuals, and we'll know how to participate or to contribute if that's needed, or to add substance or something like that to struggles. Because they're not not smart people. They can solve problems on their own, as I've seen. But the goal is to not just keep it in this bubble of just this push and pull around sex work and money. The goal is to get us to a point, and to get sex workers to a point where we have to look at the system as the ultimate cause of why we're even engaged in this struggle in the first place. And so the ultimate resolution would be we have to deal with the system in and of itself. We can still be sex workers, but deal with the system itself. We have to also be organizing against, you know, that. We have to have a cleanse, so to speak, of that. So I just want to give us one last opportunity to make any last points before we close out. I definitely want to appreciate Miriam, who's holding down the chat. We don't see her, but she's holding down the chat, holding down some of the switching and off and on. So appreciate you, Miriam. But Comrade Betty, did you have any last words you wanted to say before we close out? And then, of course,
Uh,
everybody
uh,
else can offer some last words.
oh yes, you can't have a civilized society where you don't take care of the young, and you want to solve the issue of sex trafficking versus sex for pleasure. There's a difference. In the Indian culture, they do have a whole uh, amount of literature based on sex as pleasure. It is suggested that in some of the temples that you see, some of the spiritual icons are really sexual icons, but it was not sex for
Mm-hmm.
money, it was for pleasure, and it was consenting adults. So I'm not against people having sex for pleasure, But if you're going to start a business, any business under capitalism is going to be exploitative because capitalism is exploitative. So, and
Yes.
you can't allow people to say Mary Magdalene should be stoned if you're not going to stone her sexual partner too. And that's all I have to.
Don't forget about Rebecca. I didn't want to
For
bring
Yeah,
that
real.
in.
I mean,
Everybody needs to be stuck.
the men who they
Oh, getting
claim,
biblical here.
the men who they claim received her favors, they should be stoned as well.
Yeah.
And
Correct.
this society will
Any other
never do
last thought?
that. That's why
And
Epstein was killed in prison
mm,
because
Sister,
men will never
Sister
own
Betty
up to
got
that under
bars
capitalism.
on bars. I think we could make a rap song out of Sister Betty's bars that she had put through on this
Mhm.
program today. We have to go through these clips and we're gonna pull out some gems because Sister Betty had bars. Any other last thoughts? And I also just want to appreciate what you just said, Sister Betty, about the that I was like, we talking about exploitation because we live in an exploitative system. So it's hard to separate the sexual exploitation that happens so often around the fact that people should enjoy sex.
Of
It should be
course,
a pleasurable
Correct.
thing to be
yes,
engaged,
Everyone should
you know,
enjoy it
and
of
because
age.
of this thing that we live under is often not tied to pleasure. It's often tied, in my mind, to like exploitation. There might
yes.
be
And
somebody
this is
who
why it
Agree.
should
engages
not
in
be allowed for children because you
yeah,
need a certain
Correct.
mhm,
maturity, age maturity. It's a mental process more than it is a physical process.
yeah,
You know, this is
Mhm.
absurd. This country turns everything upside down. It's disgusting because they're barbarians. They have no concept
Yeah.
of the humanness of sexual pleasure.
listen,
Okay.
Sister Betty. Any other
Mhm.
last thoughts before we close out?
Yeah, my last thought is like we at a time where it's very important that we get organized,
Thank you.
organized,
Yes.
organized. We won't be able to protest our way out of this situation that's getting escalating worse. I know yesterday said she when we was talking about the political situation, hoping that it will be since it's more polarizing that people will be more driven to get into organization. It's not the time to freeze. It's the time to fight. It's the time to organize, and it's time to for us to prepare as African people. Because if we don't fight and struggle for our place, our colonizer will be replaced with another colonizer.
And I want you also
So
aware
I want
I want to
liberation.
make you aware that in the Republic of Brooklyn, 200,000 people of African descent have been ethnically cleansed through gentrification out of our
Correct.
republic within the last 20
Mm.
years. This is being met in
Correct.
St. Louis, in Harlem. Certain parts of Florida are targeted next. So we need to pay attention to what is happening in our republic. You have the right to hold on to your
Absolutely.
territory, and deed theft and these
Mhm.
high rents that price you out of your neighborhood that you've lived in for 3 generations is a capitalist exploitative action. And
Correct.
if you notice, it's
And they price
parallel
you
to
into
where they have
homelessness.
built cop cities. And then you tie that to the fact that the National Guard is visiting these places where they are criminalizing the houseless. You need to connect the dots, and that's why you have to get organized.
Correct.
You cannot fight this without yourself. And the Black is Back Coalition, African People's
Mhm.
Socialist Party, has an excellent track record. The Uhuru 3 won. That should tell you this is the group you need to
Yes.
join.
The whole
Good
room.
guru.
I'm good with ending on that note. Ellis.
Yeah. Perfect way to end it.
Thank you for having me.
All
And
right.
Oh,
stay
so
strong.
that's
We
the
love
Yes,
last
we
you.
of it.
needed.
For
I want to
education.
thank Sister Betty, Sister Dr. Betty, for being on the show. It was a pleasure to have you. And we're going to bring you back because this is way more.
Thank you.
Obviously, an hour and a half is not enough time to capture
Fountain.
all of the things that you are able
Listen.
to throw at us. And the
And I
people in the
appreciate the
comments,
solidarity that you sisters show each other and the respect. It
yeah,
is so obvious in the way you talk to each other. Thank you
Wonderful.
for
And we
that.
got the people in the chat are loving you. People who are watching online are loving you.
Yes.
And we got to make sure that they get all the information about Sister Dr. Betty, Comrade Betty, for them
Yes.
to follow up on.
It's important for
And
them to know we will win. We will
we
win.
will win.
We
We will
will
win.
win.
Yes.
We
We
Yes,
don't ever
we
can.
doubt
will.
that. We will win.
Absolutely. We have no other choice but to win.
There
So
you
thank you,
go.
comrades.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate you. And we'll see you again next month.
Much love.
Look, I can't.